Welcome to the Emotional Fingerprint of an Adoptee. I'm Karen Chaston.
And I'm Kim Rankin.
How are you today, Kim?
I'm good, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to be discussing today and in the upcoming episodes.
And what will we be discussing?
The emotional fingerprint of an adoptee and the 4 intertwining elements which make up the emotional fingerprint.
What's really interesting is that we came up with the name, the Emotional Fingerprint of an Adoptee. And the emotional fingerprint is a psychological terminology that can relate to the emotional groundwork of a person. Doesn't necessarily need to be an adoptee, but we have delved into the emotional fingerprint of adoptees, looking at everything that happens from the time they are conceived all the way through up until adulthood and reunion and the beyond reunion. And what we found was there was these 4 intertwining connection points of what has happened in their life experience, from the time they were conceived all the way through to their birth, to their separation, and then as what happened in all of those significant moments to make up this emotional fingerprint.
That's right. And even though we all have different lived experiences, we all have similar traits based on the fact that we were separated from our mothers at some stage.
And after bonding with them in utero. And our reason, our desire is to assist people to have understanding around what has emotionally happened, the lived experiences of adoptees, because the more that people understand what they have experienced, and it's really just an education. It's a resource and education to help people to look at things from a different perspective.
That's right. And I think for many adoptees like myself who grew up in the forced adoption era and endured a closed adoption, we weren't given any words or vocabulary around our experience. So there was no space to explore what we were internalizing a lot of the time.
Yes. And the more that you internalize that, the more that you squash it down, the more it can turn into, that suppression will turn into depression. And everything, a lot of things that happened to you and many adoptees from that era and even now, is the separation happens when you're pre-verbal. So not only can you form words for yourself, most of your caregivers and people surrounding you, they didn't even have the words because they weren't given that perspective to delve into.
And I think by exploring the 4 intertwining elements, it actually gives a voice and highlights our experience, where we can hopefully raise awareness and look at adoption through a different lens to how it has been in the past.
Yes. Because the more people understand, the more that you are validated, your experiences are validated, you're not shut down. You can live in the present, and have presence around your experience without feeling, I guess, shame or guilt for bringing it up.
And judged.
Yes, very much you have been judged over the years. So, and this all leads to healing, not only for an adoptee, but for their biological parents, adoptive parents, and anyone who has an adoptee and loves an adoptee or supports an adoptee. So today we are going to start with the very first element that begins to form the emotional fingerprint of an adoptee. What is that, Kim?
It's the emotional umbilical cord.
Now, most of us know what a physical umbilical cord is. And if you don't, you have a belly button. And that's where you were attached through a cord to your mother. That's where you received all your nutrients or everything that you required at that time so that you could grow from an embryo into a 9-month or 9.5 months in the case of Kimberly.
And not only taking on the nutrients, also taking on the emotions that our mothers were experiencing at that time, along with listening to her heartbeat and her voice.
Yes.
So forming that first bond.
And it is the first one. So what we're going to do is we're not going to reinvent the wheel, as we said. In our lesson 2 of the 8 essential lessons, where we delve into from adoption to 6 years, one of our lessons, one of our insights in that lesson is that we dive deep into an adoptee's inner garden. And I really love the analogy of looking at the emotional fingerprint as a garden, an emotional garden, where, as we know, if we tend to a garden, we have the roots, which we fertilize, we water, we help to expand and grow. So the emotional umbilical cord is really the roots of it. And that's where when you are in utero, that's where the first bond begins to happen. Long before we enter this world, we are all connected physically and emotionally to our mothers. Not just adoptees, every single human being has had this experience. So we're going to now go and have a look. We're going to play part of that episode for you because it just explains it so brilliantly.
That's right.
So we'll be back soon. The emotional umbilical cord, the first bond. Before an adoptee takes their first breath, a profound and invisible bond begins to form, a bond that goes far beyond the physical umbilical cord. This emotional umbilical cord represents the deep connection between a mother and her child, created during the months spent together in utero. It is through this bond that the child first experiences the world, not through sight or sound, but through the rhythms of their mother's body. Her heartbeat, voice, movements, and even her emotional states create a familiar and safe environment that becomes the foundation of the child's sense of connection and belonging. The emotional umbilical cord is more than just a biological connection. It is the essence of attachment. The child begins to recognize their mother's voice, feels the rise and fall of her breath, and is soothed by the sound of her heartbeat. Even her emotions are communicated through the hormonal and physiological changes in her body, subtly shaping the child's early experiences. This bond is innate and instinctual, and it sets the stage for the child's understanding of safety, love, and connection. For adoptees, this bond doesn't disappear when the physical umbilical cord is severed. The emotional umbilical cord endures, creating a subconscious pull towards their mother, even if she is no longer physically present. This lingering connection is not a conscious choice. It is a felt sense, an imprint on the adoptee's body and mind. It is why many adoptees describe a sense of something missing, a longing or a yearning they can't quite put into words. This is the emotional umbilical cord in action, a tether to origins that remains even in the absence of contact or memory. Understanding the emotional umbilical cord is essential for grasping the depth of an adoptee's emotional experience. It is the starting point, the first bond that shapes how they relate to themselves and others. When this bond is disrupted through separation, it creates a ripple effect that influences their sense of identity, security, and belonging. Recognizing the presence and power of the emotional umbilical cord allows us to honour the adoptee's experience, validating the complex emotions that arise from this profound and enduring connection. By acknowledging the emotional umbilical cord as the first bond, we lay the groundwork for understanding the primal wound and the wounded inner child. It is within this context that we can begin to appreciate the intricacies of an adoptee's emotional journey and the importance of tending to their inner world with empathy and care. Welcome back. Kim, hearing that each time, even though we co-created it, we brought the script together, it still gets me, mainly because I guess I just never understood it with such depth. Even though we have both physically experienced the bond with our mothers from the time we were conceived, it's something that most people, I guess, don't think about.
I think for me, it puts into words my feelings that were internalized, that I've lived, and knowing that something has always been missing, that there's always been a yearning and a pull towards you, even when I didn't know who you were. I think it explains what that pull is and what that deep yearning has been throughout my life.
Yes. And the emotional umbilical cord it just explains it so well, that longing, that yearning, that disconnection, the immediate, where is she?
Exactly.
And why isn't she here? Like, I've been listening to her for 9 months. I've been moving with her. I've felt her. I've felt her emotions. I've felt her joy. I've felt everything, her sadness. I've heard her cry. I've heard her be angry.
That's right. And the way we're wired, it's nature's intention that our mother is there when we're born to hold us and nurture us. And, you know, that first bond is with your mother, and you form attachments with everyone else in your life, your father, your siblings, grandparents. But when that first bond is severed, it does leave an emotional imprint.
Yes, it does. And it also leaves a physical imprint.
That's right.
And I know this is also part of the second element, but it's also part of the first two, is your connection. When we got your hospital records, for example, it said baby is stiff.
That's right. So I think you know the baby experiences that separation as like a death, like they've lost their mother. But unfortunately, the way adoption has been viewed over the years has been through what has been gained rather than what has been lost. And although as an adoptee, that feeling, I know I've internalized as a child and even as an adult, that you know I had no right to feel the way I did, because I should be grateful for the life that I've been given. And, you know, in framing it, trying to assist my friends to understand me, I found that, you know, as a mother, if I can put it into words and explain the connection that as a mother I felt to my children, and my friends have felt as mothers as well, that I think it is understood a little bit better that just because we're adopted doesn't mean that that connection meant nothing.
Yeah, even though it was framed to me that once I separate, I will not miss you, I will not feel you, I will not, I will just get on with my life as though I didn't give birth to a child, which at 16, unfortunately, I believed. I went, oh yeah, okay, they seem to know what they're talking about. They're the supposed adults. And so it's heartbreaking.
It is.
But we have both felt, and this is what's really important, is the emotional umbilical cord just doesn't go one way. It's not a one line. It's actually going both ways, and we both feel the tug of the emotional umbilical cord. And I would love to be able, maybe this will happen when we do a life review when we pass, is that we'll see those moments of our life where we were connected even though we weren't physically connected.
Yes, I mean, we experience it now. I can be thinking of you and all of a sudden the phone rings or I get a text from you.
Yes. And other people do that who are
exactly.
not emotionally through the emotional umbilical cord. But I just feel we have that deeper connection. For example, you know, when you think about it, 8 years after you were born, I was married and I was pregnant with my first son. And at that time you were 8 and you were going through a lot of your night terrors and all those sort of things, and I'm sure that was part of the emotional umbilical cord tug with a friend of yours had a new sibling brother around the same time.
Yes, they did, and it was also the first time that I had been to a hospital nursery to see a baby, and so visually I was living the way my adoption had been framed to me, that I was chosen and that I had been chosen from a row of babies in a nursery. So that it became real.
Yes, because you could, you know, once you see something, it's you know, to remember or to bring something truly into you emotively, is that it needs to, all of your senses need to be involved. So that seeing of it, it made the connection so much more for you. Now, what I feel with the emotional umbilical cord is that because most people don't get it, most people just see, but the child's being replaced, like they still have loving parents who are bonding and looking after them, right? And the fact that they are usually loving and looking after them, meeting all of their needs, they don't, whether consciously or unconsciously, they never seem to want to know about that biological emotional umbilical cord.
Well, I know for myself that being adopted at 6 weeks of age, it was thought in the household that I grew up in that my life started at 6 weeks. So there was no words or there was no exploration as to what that experience was like for me as a baby to be left in the care of a rotating shift of nurses and to actually lose my mother. That was never explored. And I think by looking at the emotional umbilical cord, we're actually recognizing that the power that is in that bond.
Mm-hmm. So for adoptive parents nowadays, obviously we can't go back in time, and we wish we could. Many a time we wish we could. For adoptive parents now, how different would your life have been if your parents, your adoptive parents, had recognised that there was a bond? How would have your life, your value, your sense of belonging and longing, how different would it have been if there was a recognition continually that you have this emotional umbilical cord attachment to your biological mum?
I think, well, the recognition that I had lost my mother.
Yeah.
Because having never had that explored, the grief and the loss, it became disenfranchised. So if I'd lost my mother the day I was born, that loss would be acknowledged and recognised, and it would be spoken about as you grow, as a child is growing.
Yeah.
And they'd have words and they'd be able to explore those feelings and emotions. Where because my life in the was viewed as beginning at 6 weeks of age, that loss was never spoken about. So it was all internalized. And, you know, even throughout my, you know, my teenage years, the pull towards finding you and needing to know who you were was so great. However, unable to access records at that time to find you. So, and I think then as I got on with my life, I buried it further because the words of the people around me, I was taking on their beliefs that, you know, I should be grateful for the life that I'd lived. And so those feelings were deeply buried. And I know that I said to you many times during our early days of reunion that I was fine and that I wasn't affected at all. But, the joys of middle age and being 51 now, I can say, looking back, that throughout every stage of my life, I've been impacted by the loss.
Yeah, but that's part of the fog, which we will obviously be talking about in a future episode. So with the emotional umbilical cord, I have a girlfriend who lost her mother when she was 3. And even as an adult, like meeting her and learning about that, I had empathy, I had understanding, and I could relate to it. Whereas most of your friends and I guess even school friends,
I think
that they can't really have there's much empathy around it. Why do you feel that is?
I think that because adoption has been viewed through what has been gained, that people don't recognise the loss, and therefore my friends, especially the ones I grew up with, or my school friends, would come into my home and could see that I was in a loving family environment, and they did view my parents as my parents. However, because nobody had ever really spoken about the fact that I had lost my mother, that fact was just under the surface but never explored. And I know, in talking with a girlfriend who lost her mother when we were young teenagers, that loss, I think back to myself being her friend at that time and how we showed up. We were there to support her initially, but as the months and years went on, we didn't understand grief and loss either.
Yeah.
And so in talking to her more recently and reflecting back on that stage, and her verbalizing that nobody in her life could ever replace her mother, and I said to her at that stage, well, that's how I felt. Like, sure, I grew up in a family and I had a mother, but that attunement and the fact that you can't interchange, well, you can interchange a caregiver, but the loss of your mother, no matter how old we are, I think has a profound impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's time for society to realise that there is this biological connection. And for whatever reason, there was the separation. That doesn't stop the connection. You see so many times some mothers do horrific things to their children, but the child is still calling out for their mother.
Yeah.
And you hear those stories all the time, and everyone's going, how can they? But it is that emotional umbilical cord, that first bond to the person who brought you into this world, into this realm.
Yeah. And I think that's so, that pull is everlasting, even though we've had the separation. And I think that's what is so difficult. That was so difficult for me in the early days of our reunion, that, we both felt it. We know now,
Yeah.
like looking back on the
reason I wrote the letter, the reason I went to clairvoyance,
Yeah.
from the time I was 21, it was that cord
Yeah.
pulling both
Yeah.
of us. Yes, which is lovely, isn't it, that we're here? So we hope you've enjoyed this episode of into the first element of the emotional fingerprint of an adoptee. In our next episode, we will be delving into the second element, which is the limbic system. And it's really important that to understand, really to delve into the limbic system. Even when we first found out about it, we were like, oh my God, this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go into too much more, but the more that people understand the limbic system, we all have a limbic system. Most of us don't even know how it does and how it does actually it is such an important part for our connection, our identity, our belonging, but also it brings in when these needs are not met, it does also bring in our fight flight system. The amygdala starts to take over and we go into all these different parts. So, and it's important, the more we delve into these 4 elements, the more that we provide the understanding that will assist adoptees in their healing journey, but more importantly, in their journey to their self, to knowing that who they are and the complete picture of who they are and how they deserve to love themselves and to be loved by everyone else, because they are the most amazing people, and the life that they have lived, I feel, is one of the most tragic lives that anyone has to experience. So bye for now, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye.